Hello, everyone. You're listening today to a new recording of a conference I've made at the CERN for the Data Science Seminar on November 7th, 2024, under the title Entropy is All You Need. The quest for best tokens and the new physics of LLM. So, as being shown in the title, it's really much about a new series of research being made, how you can better generate words with LLMs. So, this conference will be both about why we think it's necessary actually to rethink the way we have been generating words, because well, LLMs have been there for quite a long time now, and we may think, okay, we nailed it the first time, so we need to revisit that. And it will be afterwards about what kind of concept we need for that. So obviously I mentioned entropy, which is a concept coming from physics, and also a reference actually to one of the leading projects in this area, which is called Entropix, which is an open research project which has generated quite some hype over the last month. So first, before we go into that, I'm just going to briefly present myself. So I'm the co-founder of Playas, which is a new French AI lab dedicated to open science LLMs. So we're only training on open sources and not permissible licenses, with the idea to be broadly compliant with the AI Act and the new regulations that are coming into place and now putting a lot of constraints about using copyright content. So we just released Common Corpus, which is the largest multilingual open pre-training dataset available currently on the link face, and compiling references from multiple open data sources. We're also going to release very soon our first SLMs. And basically, well, obviously we are supportive of the open data part of open research, but also really much about research as, okay, producing new methods, new code, and so on. And so obviously my interest for whatever I'm going to present to you with sampling. So I'm going to go straight to a kind of a controversial question, actually. So it is very simple. It is, are we ready to automate math? So the idea of math automation, I really like it. It comes from one of the lead researchers of Entropix, which I'm going to detail a bit more later on. And I like the idea because currently, there is also speculation about GI, about, okay, we are going to create like gods and stuff like this. Well, this is both highly ambitious and objective, but also highly grounded, because it's really much about not creating some kind of very fuzzy AGI, but it's really much about, okay, are we or do we not have right now machines able to solve complex problems of math, and possibly problems that are not necessarily phrased well, but as any kind of math researcher is currently able to rephrase that, find new research, basically produce all a complex chain of reasoning, borrowing concepts from different math domain and so on, to basically solve that. I think it's a very good objective right now in terms of building intelligent machines. And now, if we listen to what OpenAI is saying, what a lot of frontier labs are saying is that, okay, it's already been done now, basically, that's what they claim. So, in September 2024, OpenAI unveiled its latest frontier model called O1, which is claimed to exceed human PhD level accuracy on a benchmark of physics, biology, and chemistry problem. It has also been claimed to pass the Math Olympiads. So basically what OpenAI is claiming right now is not just, okay, we made machines that are as good as humans, which is already controversial, but they're as good as the best humans. Definitely it will come really into AGI territory. So if you just read that, okay, you're going to say, definitely we are ready to automate math, it's already being done. I'm going to ring a more disturbing bell right now. If you look into a one, if you look into all the best LLMs there is currently, I have another example about Sonnet from Entropix, so it's not specific to OpenAI at all. And rather than just asking very complex problems that need to be solved at math Olympiad levels, we're going to start with a very simple one that anyone should be able to solve, and including even school children should be able to solve. So this problem is very simple. Out of two numbers, one 9.8 and 9.11, which is the largest? So I asked one, the mini version, to be honest, for this. The model thought for a few seconds. So basically it's used, and this part of thought basically is very complex, because it means not only that, okay, the model is really wide to consume enough energy, but very likely there has been a chain of thought before getting to this part. also called the reasoning traces, which is kind of specific to the one series of models. And okay, this very complex process now being used by the most one model created by the brightest man in the world using a gigantic amount of GPU. Basically, you did something that even very young children would not do. So basically, the false answers that 911 will be greater than 918. So basically, what is happening here? The main problem that we have right now is not just having models that are going to be bright enough. That's one thing. So we need to have large model and so on to get basically this reasoning process into place. But the issue really with reasoning, it's a chain basically. So you need to get from one word word A to word B to C, and so on. So it's like logic, all of these things. Of course, you can get shortcuts. It's much more messy, and we know actually by experience that even a lot of really bright scientists don't necessarily think really linearly, actually. But still, you have this process, and especially if you're thinking about chain of thoughts, about reasoning traces, you need to have this process really well into places. And now the key issue, which is actually at the origin of this new wave of research for LLM sampler, is the fact we don't necessarily select the right words or the right tokens during generation time. So what I'm showing you to you with this very fancy visualization, which is done by one of the contributors to Entropix, is basically not using O1 at all, not even using one of the leading models from OpenAI or anything. It's a model which is considerably smaller than that. It's a Llama 1B model. So we don't know the size of the OpenAI model, but just to give you an example, initially it was 4 that GPT-4 would have been a 1.8 trillion parameters model. Well, we know by now, obviously, the models they are using is much smaller than that, but definitely they have been trying to use really gigantic models. So you have this very tiny model in comparison that can even run on CPU without quantization or anything, being used with this kind of fancy frameworks you can see right now, which is basically aiming to better select the tokens. So you see the dimension being put here, you have token dimensions, and you have different kind of metrics, which I'm going to detail later on in the presentation, called entropy, entropy, and so on, attention and logits. All of this basically are drawing a space where the model is able to better select the tokens. And it does that using a lot of physics-inspired math. So this is basically what is going to be my point today. So, which is basically also this meme I published a while ago. Yeah, I guess we're doing physics now, and we're going to need actually to borrow a lot of these concepts that are going to come from any kind of math linked to thermodynamics and so on to better select the tokens. So before we come to that, I'm just going to go back a bit into time. So we're going to use our fork tokens for a minute and stop, also being called the post tokens in the phraseology that have come after O1. And we're going to think about the tokens actually, what they are exactly, what it is. So the fact also, which is really important, that LLMs are not directly generating words, but they are generating something else. And this little something actually is both special, splitted, untrained. So there's a lot of issues actually with tokens right now, while also a lot of opportunities with that. A lot of people don't like tokens, and people think that all the LLMs later on will be tokenized or less. We're not there yet. We need to keep on with the tokens, and maybe we need to care a bit more about them rather than just considering they are kind of a nuisance, because they are a fundamental building block of LLMs. LLMs would not exist right now without tokens. But yeah, let's coming back to it. So very first thing, very important, what LLMs actually see. And I think that's a lot of an understanding right now due to the fact we not really care into account what the LLMs basically are dealing with, which is not what humans are dealing with. So right now, what we have is tokens, which are basically a compromise between the maximum number of information you need the model can manage, basically how you want to store the information, and the most efficient text representation called compression ratio. So basically it's a balance, which is kind of tricky. That's why we get what we get right now. Typically, If you care mostly about diminishing the unit information and also making it more granular, you can end up with design like typically like there was this model called Mamba bytes, which stored 1 unit per byte, not even letters. So this is very, very, very inefficient in terms of compression. So it means basically you're going to generate, it can take a lot of time to generate work, but it's extremely efficient in terms of, okay, we don't have many building blocks, so it just means the model is going to be really seeing almost letters like we do, which we do not get right now. Then you got the reverse, which will be to store an enormous amount of units, great for compression, but terrible afterwards to actually run the model, because on the other side, you're going to end up with gigantic matrices of embeddings, of tokens, and so on. So we'll see afterwards how actually the models are basically structured in of architecture to deal with these things. But just right now, okay, we got this compromise. This compromise is going to be obviously different depending on the intent of the model. So what I'm showing you in this image right now is a compression being made for text in French, come from Proust, using the Llama original tokenizer and the one which ran at Playas, which is more effective for French. So what you're seeing basically is that there's a lot more splitting. So all these little units actually you're seeing, which are not an entire word, are being called subwords. They're also very important because it means basically when you're doing too much subwordization, on the one hand, you make the model better able to see basically the almost phonetic information in the text. On the other side also means you're kind of diluting the semantic information. So this is going to be somewhat important, especially when you're going to come to letters. So tokenizer, they were invented actually not so long ago, almost 10 years ago. Before LLMs, that's also a weird thing also too. Not so long, but before the LLMs. And they were originally invented, which is something kind of ironic, actually. They were invented to deal better with non-Western script. So basically the core idea was even created for Japanese. So it's ironic because right now, one of the main issues with LLMs, which I'm not going to be doing too much for today, is the language bias. Basically, all the tokenizer models they are better trained in English. That was the issue we are kind of seeing with the Llama for French, but French is not that worse actually. It's much worse when you have language being written in a different script. So typically that's the case with Hindi. So typically you see the situation, I think it's come from an article from Leonie Monegatti, published 1 year ago. And you see hello world in with an English tokenizer is going fine. The command tokenizer actually is being just 2 tokens. Now if you take a text in Hindi, not only one word is going to be a token, but even one letter is going to be a token. So you end up with a lot of tokens, so it adds a lot of imbalance right now. On two fronts, it simply costs much more to interact with an LLMs where you're not speaking English, or even worse, you're not speaking Latin script. And the LLM is going to be less performant. So you're paying more for something that is worse, basically. So it's kind of a big issue, and one also the big impetus where we need more diversity in training, and we need to have more, maybe we don't actually to have LLMs that are going to be good, claim to be good at all languages, but that can be actually more diverse and more regionally based. So that's general idea. Now let's go back actually to what is our main focus right now, which are going to be numbers. So I'm going to be spending a bit of time onto that, even though it kind of detract to the main topic we're going to see, because I think it's hugely important and not many people are giving enough thought about it. So numbers basically are tokenized, but sometimes using specific rules, because very quickly, people actually realized that if we were just following on to the way the tokens are being splitted, which is done by using a statistical algorithm called BPE, you're going to end up with something which does not make a lot of sense. So basically, what is happening right now is that with Llama, its number is the range 0 to 99999 range is its own token. Okay, so all the numbers until thousands are their own token. But it's a bit unclear what is happening with OpenAI, but it seems to follow the same pattern. Now, what it does mean is that what you're seeing right now is a playground for tokenizer with OpenAI. So I'm really inviting when you do a bit of prompt engineering to play a bit with that, because sometimes it also helps to see typically why sometimes a prompt, or especially when you deal with numbers, can result into weird things. What we're seeing right now is that if I ask which number is the bigger, 9.9 or 9.8 for that matters are going to be 3 tokens. 9.11 is also going to be 3 tokens with 1 token for 11. So it means basically that the meaning attached to the tokens is going to be the meaning of 11 in absolute, in absolute, basically, with all the kind of meaning that can come into it from everything else the model has seen through training. And what most of the model has seen through training, as we can intuit, is that, well, 11 tends to be larger than 8. Of course, it's positional afterwards, so normally, and then afterwards, due to the transformer architecture, due to the attention mechanism, it should be able still to guess that due to the way it's being written with the decimal and so on, 11s will be actually smaller in this specific context. But that's still a first source of confusions, and there are going to be more. So prefigures is one possible strategy. So just what I'm going to show you basically is all the possibilities that we can do with numbers. And you see basically, this was about what I wanted to select to use it because all of this is non-trivial. It's decisions being made. It's not just, okay, there is an absolute very truth about how you're going to deal with this stuff when you're building on LLMs. You have to make choices, and these choices are going to have consequences, are going to affect the performance downstream. So you have BPE, which is basically the normal, so fuzzy approach, basically. And numbers, it can be, well, it depends during training of the tokenizer, depends on the frequency of the numbers. So typically, like a number like 666, for instance, will be very likely present, but for a variety of reasons, not just because we're counting stuff. So it will depend. It will also depend sometimes at different time because the compression is going to be different. It's going to try to optimize compressions, but yet regardless of the way the number is being written. So basically, it is completely arbitrary, so it's really not great in terms of having some kind of consistency, but at the very least, all the numbers will be relatively well trained. So basically, they will be based on a statistical analysis of frequency. Well, providing the corpus for the tokenizer is good, which is really not always the case, unfortunately. A lot of cases, basically, it's different. That's also how we end up with some weird things, like for instance, the GPT-4 tokenizer containing a lot of tokens for pornography, yes, in Chinese, due to the fact, I don't know what they messed up with tokenizer, but definitely they messed it up. So the other solution, which was done for the Llama 1 actually, but I don't know why it won't be taken up, even though it seems a very good idea on paper, which is basically just, okay, single digit tokenization. We split everything by 1 digit. So personally, I kind of like the idea, but I have to acknowledge it has been kind of dropped for the last 2 years or so. My guess that it's possibly due to the negative effect on compression ratio. There's also something I've been seeing when I try to train my own tokenizer. And okay, it adds up really a lot of tokens on more. So it's not so great when you want to train because training is longer. It's not so great when you want to run inferences because inferences is longer, but I still think it can be an idea worth exploring, typically for models which are really being thought and designed for math, and can be actually a great project for a small language model, which can be actually a small math model at this point. And then there are a lot of potential alternatives for research, and this one is probably implemented by Claude, but we don't know because Claude is Entropic, not releasing its tokenizer. So it looks really much like a detail, but I think it's really symptomatic of how these big labs are really, really not interacting with open research right now. Because a tokenizer should really, really be part of, I would say, almost the packages of what we try to show in terms of what is your LLM. So not thinking even about the weights or anything. Okay, it can be their own triplet and so on. But tokenizer, they are so important to just assess, okay, is the model good in my language? Is it able to support good any kind of specialized information? So what I'm going to deal with is good at dealing with numbers. All these kinds of things that should really, really be in the open. It's really like a basic principle, I think, of just industrial transparency. But they aren't. So it's a bit of a TPT because it seems that Entropix really thought its way around that. And they implemented what's called the right to left tokenization, basically. The core idea seems very simple. I think it's kind of great. Is that they start tokenization by always keeping the first figure smaller. So you see in this large number, one, it's an on thing, and then the rest can be dispersed in this way. So the reason I think I spend so much time on this is just to show you that, okay, even before thinking about selecting the best tokens, you need to create tokens. Once again, it's not trivial at all. So now, why do we have this issue with 9.8 versus 9.11? So we said that we raised a few hypotheses, which are due to the fact, okay, maybe it's the way numbers are being cut off, basically. Okay, and okay, maybe it's because it's 11 versus 8. That's one thing. But that's not the only thing, because as I mentioned before, normally the attention mechanism should normally correct this type of thing. And typically, okay, you got this way of writing the numbers with decimal points and so on. It should infer normally that the meaning is going to be shifted. And typically, well, I'm going to talk afterwards about this. There are tokens embeddings in the LLMs, but they are not that important. And normally, they should be really shift massively once you're going to use a token contextual embeddings, which you're going to use while you're generating words. So, okay, the main issue right now is whether that token embedding of figures are too polysemic. That's a big issue. And it's something that has been shown by a great project of LLM explainability called Transluce, where basically they retrained Llama 8B and they use what is called autoencoders. I think it's LCE, I think they use. So basically, it's like a little, it's like basically they are using, when they're going to retrain ways of better access the inner process of the models to see exactly what is happening here, what kind of, well, they call it neurons are being active. I don't classify it too much because I think they're kind of doing too much parallel between the model and the brain. Well, obviously, it's neural network, obviously, but it's really different what we're doing right now. And even the interpretability of this thing is kind of questionable at some point. So I'm not entirely sure it's the best way to name that, but still. The core idea is that, okay, while it's generating, what kind of part of the latent space it's going to use, it's going to awake while it's going to be generating. So what has been seen, and you can actually play with it on the website, and I think it's a great way to get a better intuitive vision of what LLMs are. If you type this number like 10.11, what you're going to see is going to awake World Trade Center attacks, chemical compounds, some Bible verses, and chapters. So, well, World Trade Center attack is the date, obviously, chemical compounds. I really think the most important one is the list, because there is a lot of occurrences for this. And chapters, especially. I'm thinking I also table of content here. What I think is possibly this is that, well, when you're going to number the chapter, you're doing sequentially, but you're not going to use the math ways. You're going to use sequentially with the core idea that, okay, 911 is after 910, which is after 99, and so on. You're not using actual math for this. You're going to use different interpretations of what you're going to do with numbers, so it's like a different numbering systems. So basically what it means is that right now LLMs are doing math with apples and oranges. We are using different counting systems, one on top of the other, and we kind of let actually at some point the model to decide which one it wants to select. And they're not going to necessarily select the right one. That's going to be the main issue. I'm just going to show you another more striking example of this issue of selections, which is actually something which can break up further the selection, which are going to be entrained tokens. So it's kind of the reverse of what we're seeing right now. I would say at this moment, this token from 911 and 911 is to train, maybe, train on too many things at once. Then you have the reverse, which are tokens that are completely untrained or not well trained enough, which is another set of issues because at some point it means that the model, while they're going to output these tokens, won't know exactly what to do afterwards because the words are not being really seen. And okay, they can use the previous context, but still, that's what it's always the most important one. And so then it's going to kind of break up the path. It's a bit like someone talking in a kind of foreign language, which I'm actually doing right now, but well, I see that I know English reasonably well. Suddenly bumping into a word he cannot find or what he cannot define, and okay, trying to go from this point and getting kind of lost. So this is something which has a name, actually. This effect is called solid gold magic carp from a really, really great paper, which was made on trade tokens. So solid gold magic carp was basically, I think it was a Pokemon not exactly a Pokemon, but I think a Pokemon compound or something like that. Where really something which is exceedingly rare. It should not have happened. Most of the entry tokens usually they are due to the fact of how tokenizers are being trained. And tokenizers they can be trained on basically a set which are usually too small. That's the main issue I would say. Right now we're training our own tokenizer on much, much more data than in commonplace, and I really think it should become standard in the field. But classically, tokenizers about trained not very not that much data, something like 2 billion tokens. But seems a lot, but when you get this long tail, you got the zip flow, you got all these things. Well, your last tokens are not going to be the present. Maybe they're going to be something like 5 or 10 occurrences in the entire text. And if you didn't select the text well, you have too many repeats or so on, you are bound to have this type of issues happening. So this is something that can typically happen for some of the three-digit compounds we can see typically, because once again we have kind of enforced these divisions about okay, this is going to be every number from 1 to 199, and yes, once you get into these selections, you are bound to get potentially numbers that are maybe not going to be straight on train, but still little train, and too little train to really be completely sure about what you're going to do with that. So among the tokens, what you also have actually, and it's something which has become much more prevalent, it's going to be really important for what I'm going to say afterwards. This is the reason I'm going to give some hot tokens to that, is special tokens. Basically, and the core idea of it is the fact that with what they are trying to achieve right now to make better LLMs, well, there have been this nice story of scaling laws. So basically, the first one, okay, you need to have large models better than small models. Then models trained on a lot of words are going to be better than models trained on not that much words. And basically, it means that you can get small models actually that are actually good because they are being trained on a lot. Well, it has been also found that quality data was also scaling laws, and but basically getting better data, you can use less words and less parameters and still get good models. And so now we got this idea of inference scaling, basically. So the core idea is, okay, we're going to improve on the model by letting it more space to write and think and give more thoughts to what it's going to say. So a bit similar to a human once again, because we can make the comparison, the assumption that even someone which is not that great in a topic can still give good answers if we let it like, I don't know, 1 or 2 hours to answer, whether someone which has more familiarity with it, with only a few minutes will not be able to come up with that good of an answer. So, okay, for this, what we're using right now is special tokens for this. One of the reasons, well, that's the reason for it. First is to enforce this reasoning step to ensure that the model is going to think about the actual answer pattern. It's also kind of a trade secret also too. So basically the fact that, okay, they don't want actually this big, they spend a lot of money actually on creating these reasoning traces, basically by paying PhDs to write a lot of stuff. And well, it costs money and all of these things, and also they don't want basically to have the competition keeping on reusing this kind of reasoning traces and so on. So that's the reason they're going to use special tokens. But now it's kind of funny because the one from Claude, I don't remember actually the one from O1, maybe it's not even known, but the one from Claude was found. It's called Unthinking. And this is kind of funny because if you use a special tokens, you can really hack into the actual LLMs. You can kind of steer its own reasoning in a way. It's really like hacking, honestly, because you can definitely change the way the overall reasoning direction is going to use. So you can see it in the example I'm showing you right now in the slide. First, I'm going to ask what is the larger numbers, 911 or 98. So it's going to get it wrong. Again, one of the best LLMs there is Sonnet. Get it wrong. That's one thing. Then afterwards, I'm going to ask, okay, are you sure about it? Then I'm going to do it. Strong tip. Check the undrift, please. Okay. It's going to check it. It's going to come using, okay, you realize make a mistake. Then I'm going to ask it when you make this mistake. And this, I'm going to get another larger tip because even though Claude is really clever, the Sonnet one, but it's not necessarily aware of the latest development of tokenization and so on, which are really new. Yeah, I'm thinking especially about transfer thinking, which I really don't think is into its own training data. But since I'm giving you this tip, obviously it's going to come into it. So Basically, we got these special tokens. Again, these are going to be important because it's another leverage we can use. And that's kind of part of the new wave of research being right now, because there have been already research on LLM sampling some years ago. But this part about using special tokens that are going to kind of enforce at some point the fact, okay, the model need to reconsider what it's doing right now. This part is really new. It's really something that is being included in training or in post-training very recently. And this is the part we can leverage that we could not have until very long ago. And Entropix is especially going to be built around this idea. So basically, when you take everything into account that I mentioned just before, the way tokens are being cut off, how they are being trained with all the polysemy we can see, and basically how we can model reasoning on top of it. Well, what we can see actually is reasoning is kind of brittle. It exists definitely, and I think it's a great achievement we have made. And it also made me really confident about the fact that we have some really powerful thing being developed right now with LLMs, particularly having this kind of reasoning machines. They do exist, but they are very brittle. And then by comparison, actually, well, they are kind of simple as well. I think it's a great example because it's a kind of fallacy that only a school children would make when they're kind of beginning to learn the numbers. And obviously, you need to integrate the fact that the relationship between number at the decimal point is not the same as it is when you deal with number, which are going to be integers. And it's simple, and we can see still that there can be a compounding effect right now, because once again is simple math, the kind of simple math that is normally used as the building block to do more advanced math. That is, if you want to be doing, you're building a very long series of demonstration, well, you somewhat need to have it right with the decimals. It's kind of a very basic thing that you're going to use at some point, and not having been able to do that is kind of an issue if your aim is really to get models that are going to be great at professional level math. So the big dot right now, and then we've analyzed it right now, I would say in advanced research is the LLMs as all the benchmark accomplishments we are seeing right now will claim anything more than memorization. That's really the key issue. And obviously, OpenAI is also going to claim, obviously, that they are only tested with exercises which are too recent to have been seen on training, and I think they are honest about it, but the key issue is that math exercise, even the kind you're seeing in Olympiad and so on, well, they're not that original actually. And the reason actually people can get really great at math is that at some point, okay, they're going to revisit very similar problems and they're going to come up with a kind of similar answers. But when you're doing fundamental math research, you don't have this kind of guidelines. You need to come up with your own plan. You need to develop something new. Very frequently, what is happening in this field that you're going to borrow concept from an entirely very different math domain. It has been happening a lot. Where typically, okay, we're going to use concept of topology to solve this thing and so on. This is the part where we're actually doing great math research. And now whether LLMs are actually able to do so well, they don't have this guidance. Well, they're not just reassessing things, they're kind of memorized. It's kind of an open question. So basically, if you want to improve on that, we need to better select tokens. But before we come to that, I'm just going to go back to how we select tokens. So we have seen how we are building tokens, basically, okay, and we see it's kind of messy. And again, I really wanted to stress to you that we are doing a lot of assumptions right now about how we cut off words, how they are going to be trained, how they are going to be integrated into an overall system of communications. It's not obvious at all. And also the reason which is so great actually if you're doing LLM research right now, because we have plenty of open questions which are kind of unsolved and possibly the best system are still to build. Now, how we select them? Well, it's a whole other range of open questions. And actually that's one of the parts where actually it's great that there have been this wave of research of LLM sampling, because this part used to be like neglected, not really a black box, actually, because it's reasonably well documented, but just something we thought, okay, almost like solved in a way. It has been done once, and what should we revisit that? But we should definitely revisit it. So basically, what are LLMs? So maybe I should have started with a question, but it made more sense to deal with that right now. Well, you can just print them actually. Go ahead and print a model like this one. So it's not a llama model actually, it's ModelM, which is a new model from Hugging Face. But it's a llama style model, a bit like the one we're working on if we're going to release in a very little while. So what you're seeing right now is in this list, that's really just showing to you that what is being called a model is not really like a machine learning model typically, where, okay, we get something which is kind of consistent. And it's much more heteroclite. You get a lot of building blocks, and a lot of parts are dealing with attention mechanism. A lot of some parts typically are, this is going to be the first part, we're going to see the embed tokens, embeddings. There are the init embeddings being used at first generation. That maybe is the part actually that may be messing up right now with numbers, because typically the init embeddings you're going to see can uncover too many different meanings. That's one thing. So it's a model which has a bit less than 50,000 tokens. So basically, what you're going to see in the embedding matrix, 49,152. And it is also a little number of dimensions because it's a small model right now, so it's much smaller than even an might be. But we should make it great once again for the type of experimentation we're going to see with entropy and so on, because you don't even need actually even, you can work with also GPU to run it. So it makes it great to do this kind of thing. So that's one thing. Then you got the attention mechanism, and then you got the actual raw outputs, which are being made at the end of the process. So, okay, you enter your text, the model is going to translate this text to the tokens, tokenization. They're going to map it to the matrix of embeddings, it's going to activate them. Then you're going to have all the process being run with the attention mechanism, which I'm not going to be dealing any kind of ways today. And then you got the raw outputs. This is really the part where we're going to zoom in. This is the part which mentions the softmax you can see. And the simple word softmax is kind of signaling that what we're dealing with is fundamentally a physics problem. So the key issue is that when they are prompted, the models are not just going to return one word. They're going to return actually all the words, all the tokens, all the 49,152 tokens of small LLM, all the 141,000, another number of Llama, all the 256,000 tokens of Gemma. They are each going to be returned at generation time. So you're going to see all these tokens, and all these tokens, they're going to be graded. They're going to be like, okay, like in a classroom, typically, they're all students in the big universities. And each time you're going to generate it, they're going to come with downgrade, which is called the logit. So typically you can reassemble like this. So here I'm going to use my favorite initial prompt, which is it was a dark and stormy night. Classic, it is cliche from Snoopy. And okay, we can actually check actually the grade at each part of the generation. So if I'm just going to ask it was a dark and stormy something, well, the model is kind of confident actually that something could be night. Even though it's a small model, but it has probably seen these cliches several times. So, okay, the attention mechanism is going to say, okay, it's very likely to be night. It's going to be the next path. But if it's not night, it could be day. It could be time. It could be evening. It could be winter. All these things. Simply because it makes sense within the way the sentence is constructed to have something which is kind of a reference to a time period. It was the dark and stormy night, to the dark and stormy day, to the dark and stormy winter. All the things kind of flow really well within the way of the sentence, and it makes sense, basically. And also, why typically I really like to think of language models as some kind of structuralist machine, because it's actually one of the core assumptions of structuralism, that each word we are kind of writing, they are being selected by the syntax, obviously, so you're not going to put the verbs while you should have a word, but they're also being guided by some kind of semantic constraints, which make it that it would be almost, well, you have actually a limited range of words you can select. It's a hypothesis from James Leff, which was a linguist almost 100 years ago, so it's really not recent, but which were basically created structural linguistics. And I think it's paradigmatic relationship I'm talking about right now. So basically the core idea that, okay, you are going to have the words before, and then afterwards you're going to have the next word, and the next word should make some sense. And if you, basically you're guided by the sentence. So the core idea of structuralism, you're not exactly a completely independent speaker. You are basically guided by the things you said prior to, yeah, and it gives you a limited amount of freedoms. It's a bit like music. Okay, you're going to write, you're going to improvise and so on, but you're still bounded by basic rules of harmony. You can break them, but it's a message in itself. It's kind of a strong break to it. Same thing here, you can break it, but it will make something which is a bit akin, like experimental poetry and so on. still sending a message that you're going to detract from this self-relationship. So typically, if you want to do something really absurd, you can check the final list of tokens. You can see it right there. What we have is serializer if it's an error word selective. So 4 out of 5, they're not even words, they're subwords, they're compounds. So they're making them extremely unlikely because this should really happen within some kind of word roots that when they would make sense, typically. So that's a key issue right now. So that makes them extremely improbable within the context of the sentence. So right now, if we want to theta select words, we have these logits typically that are being put right now. But usually to make them having more sense, what we can use is a transformation into actual probabilistic values. Because an issue you can see right now in the logits where they are being written by the language models, there are several of them. First, obviously, it's both negative and positive, but that's great. You prefer to have something like a range between 0 and 1. Then it's a kind of a grading, which all the output are kind of close together. Again, it's not that great because it means that you can have a high probability of detracting. And what you want actually, that's a core issue is both creativity and balance of finding the right balance between creativity and not generating too much hallucination or too much randomness. You want the model to be both. That's a concept actually of what's being called a stochastic parrot in the literature. You want the model actually to be both kind of random in a way. So it needs to select different numbers. It should not be always the darkest terminal because it would be kind of a bore. You need to have some variation, but you don't want this variation to be that wide. It should come within some kind of constraint. So again, I'm thinking also once again about the metaphor with music at some point. Okay, you can detract from the general harmony, but it should be some kind of a rare event. It should not be all the time because otherwise the music is not going to be making a lot of sense. You need to play along with these rules at some point. So that's what we're going to use. We're going to practically convert the logit into a probabilistic values with the heavier weights given to the ones that are more likely to occur to avoid getting too much variations typically. So we're going to use the formula for it, which comes from classic statistical mechanism, basically a mechanic function called softmax, or actually it's a modified softmax to better deal with negative logits. So, well, I'm putting you the expression. You can definitely check my code notebook if you want to play a bit more with it. But the core idea is very simple. Basically, given a list of numbers, basically, so it's kind of relative to the overall breadth of the vectors and everything like this. You're going to return a list of probabilities that are going to be making somewhat sense. So here, typically, you see two different lists here. The one are kind of close bundled together. And so basically, almost each word are almost the same probability of occurring, but you still see the identification where 102 is much it's way higher graded. It's still higher graded than the other ones typically. So you get 36% of occurring for this one. Then if you use it with a mid-entropy, typically here, what you're going to end up, that's the kind of thing like 20 years variation between this number. You see basically the amplification is kind of different, but you see it's already being cluttered a lot into the higher number, which has a 86% chance of appearing. So all these kinds of things to basically ensure that, okay, you're going to maintain some stochasticity, you're going to maintain some variation, but within still general patterns when you're giving more gravity, more weight to the number with the highest frequency of probability. So, okay, this is basically weighted randomness, basically. It means basically there's still the possibility even to an actually completely unlikely tokens to appear. And you can shift the direction of the discourse because it's kind of nice. So also how the language is kind of behaving at some point. Basically, you can have this certain breadth, change of path, change of direction in the conversation. That's one thing. But then it should not occur all the time at all. It should be like a kind of rare dramatic event that can happen, but otherwise you should still maintain several consistency where, okay, if you're not going to be night, it's going to be day, and sometimes we're kind of expecting something like a time period which are going to occur. So basically, yeah, each time you can have several candidates. And what you're seeing right now is selection being made with different kind of ranks, basically. And yeah, you're going to have basically selection being made. So now the critical point, which are going to be actually the origin point of the current research, LLM samplers. There are hyperparameters to guide control generation. The most important one is going to be temperature, which is not really an random name actually at all, because it comes straight from thermodynamics, and all these equations that were made to model basically hotness and coldness into gas and liquid and stuff like this. So okay, obviously we're going to borrow the same kind of concept for it, even though obviously well, our words are not really cold or hot, but still the metaphor can still hold somewhat. So, but all these parameters, they're going to be fixed. They are not going to be changing at generation time. This is actually hugely important because basically you have to make a choice in one go. It's going to affect your entire sample selection throughout the entire generation time. You can say, okay, I want the LLM to be really creative, so I'm going to use a higher temperature, which is basically going to flatten the logit distribution, so basically it'll make it more possible to have words. It's not going to be necessarily the first one to appear in a selection, that's one thing. Or I can say, no, I really want to be sure about what I'm doing, so I'm going to use very low temperature. Most of the time it's going to be the first logit, so even it can be 0 or deterministic temperature, so I'm just going to select the first one. Not going to care about all this kind of variability. But yeah, it's going to be fixed. And we may wonder if it has quite of an idea actually at some point, because we're not taking advantage of the evolving information and generation time. And I think this is really important also due to the fact right now we are kind of expecting longer outputs from our model. I think that's kind of a big breaking point from what it used to be 2 or 3 years ago when we were generating text LLMs. It tends to be rather shorter. All the first benchmarks, there were questions like what is the capital of France? Is it going to be Paris or this kind of thing? And afterwards, we started to be dealing with longer type with ChatGPT. Now that we have all these thought tokens, this inference scaling and so on, well, we're kind of expecting long outputs. And when it means long outputs, it means some kind of planning and strategies. It means also some kind of a narrative. And so basically, there are going to be steps in the structure of the general text, where the model is going to generate something in which it's going to be highly confident, and something where, okay, actually it's not confident about what it's actually doing. Having a fixed parameter for this, with actually, again, the expanding scale of the output of the model. And it's really such a good idea, actually. Well, there's a kind of open question which we now aim to solve with the current research on LLM sampling, and especially the entropy switch. So that's why I think I'm going to really stress this part, because I think this is really something that are going to make it really understandable where we want to go right now with this new approaches is toward flexible generation strategies. So basically saying, okay, the model has been non-creative for a while, typically, and at some point, even though we want to use this kind of cold approach to basically, okay, we want to really be sure about what's generating, still, because it's emitting the non-trained tokens, because it's going to open up a new sentence which is completely related to the previous one, because it's going to open a thought tokens or whatever, it kind of step with actually being too deterministic and necessarily a right idea. And we probably need to reopen the potential paths of text generation, the potential narrative path where I want to go. So again, it's a bit like in the novels, and I think if you want actually models to progress, maybe at some point you need to write not necessarily novels, but at least kind of longer narratives. Okay, there are a lot of parts which are almost like automated writing in a way. I'm kind of sorry for writers, but usually we're not always that original. There are dialogues, there are very specific settings, the character are going to talk about stuff, and then afterwards the dialogue is going to close, and then new chapter begins, new description, new places, and so on. Well, if we want to go into these new directions, well, it's kind of not good actually that the model is going to be too constraints. It needs to be given some freedom back, and then this freedom needs to come close back, because actually we are back to a kind of a more ritualistic ways of generating text. So I will call it a shift in vibes, but it's kind of a shift which is kind of guided again by, I would say, the general change of paradigm over LLMs that have come over the past few months. Idea of inference scaling, the big premium giving on reasoning, and even the core idea that I think is going to be really hugely important in the coming months, the idea that maybe we need to separate reasoning from memorizations, and maybe, just maybe, small models can be actually competitive with larger ones once we kind of get it better at thinking. And maybe we don't need actually a gigantic number of parameters for that, but we still need actually to think about general design. So it's a shift in vibes. There have been 3 important publications on this, which are all really recent. And they are converging on the idea. So the first one is coming straight from DeepMind, Velishkovich et al. The other one is I would say, well, I mentioned it afterwards, but I think it's one of the most advanced research in many ways in terms of how it has done a general systematic evaluation of what these samplers can do. So from Yuan Natmin et al. And then afterwards, the third that is not like the other ones, obviously, because what you're seeing right now is pseudonyms, not actual names. So from a collective of researchers being led by HDR and Doomslide. And the other collaborators, well, I already mentioned a few of them, I think, throughout this presentation, is basically the Entropix project. So 3 different initiatives, but still the same overall principles. But we need to rethink token selection by letting the model adjust the hyperparameters at inference time. So not just, okay, setting, we're going to do the temperature for once and for all. But yeah, as we let the model kind of design, always, it's a bit like a movie, basically it's going to build up the scene and so on. And maybe at some point you need to change the overall narrative, change the overall scene. We need to ensure it's going to be creative enough for this. Or at some point, not being creative because, okay, the rules of the game are being played. You just need to continue on this trajectory. So the first one, so far is not enough. I think it's really my recommendation if you want to start getting into these new vibes, basically, because it's a very straightforward paper from DeepMind, and it comes back to the actual overall context about, okay, why are we using softmax for a start in deep learning? And the reason, obviously, is come back to a lot of interdimensional research. With physics, actually kind of linked to the Nobel of Physics, because actually Geoffrey Hinton also played a part into that. That's the one thing. And then afterwards, it comes back with the idea that, okay, we need to rethink simulation token strategy at inference time, and it proposes an adaptive temperature strategy. So I think that's a very straightforward way to get into that. Also, I've got visualization like the one you're seeing right now. And the core idea of the natural browser strategy is to basically let the model become more or less creative depending on the logit entropy. So typically, you're going to increase temperature, you're going to increase the hotness, or you're going to decrease it depending on what you're seeing in terms of how the model is consistent. So as far as I remember, in the paper, they only use the entropy for the current token. They don't only use the inference entropy, but also the attention entropy. But yeah, it's basically for each tokens in successions, basically. So, which is going to be a different approach you're going to see afterwards in Entropix, because Entropix is going to also to leverage all the entropy of the past tokens, which we're going to see afterwards. So then you got adaptive min-p sampling. It's again some idea. We'll need to change the rules at inference time. The main difference is the upper parameter we're going to select, because it's going to be the number of tokens sampled, basically. Okay, what is your population? Not necessarily what is going to be the probability distribution, but basically just how far back you're going to select your tokens. Is it only the first 10, the first 100, without touching for the probabilities or whatever? So the core idea is kind of actually really intuitive, basically. We can enlarge the speed of selection when the model is uncertain, typically. So again, when the model is going to open up a new narrative branch. Maybe we need to increase the amount of variability of entropy, basically, in the selection by stating, okay, it can be as big as 100 or 1000, and then we can get even rare tokens appearing. So this paper is really important because, once again, as to my knowledge, actually, it's the first model of this kind has been really systematically evaluated and has shown real gains capacities for math. So, which is kind of making sense, basically, the fact that, okay, when you're going to generate the tokens for what we have been seeing also with all the demonstration for Entropix, once you're going to give more thoughts to tokens, you're going to generate, you're going to get more reliability and so on. Basically, you can get more straightforward and consistent. You have implemented some kind of a feedback mechanism into the model. Basically, okay, it's uncertain, then it go back to the selection, it's going to enlarge it, and it's going to come back with a better selection. And then we come to the most complex implementation approach today. So maybe not necessarily the first one you need to go into, even though now there are a lot of great introduction to it, to Entropix, but it's really big and ambitious project, I would say right now. It's pretty much in building. And it's really ambitious also because what I really like with it is that it's not only about metrics, like we have seen in the two other project, but it's also it's more wider than that. I think it really leverages the entire universe of what LLMs can do, and also going to leverage typically the possibility to use special tokens. So you got this part typically insert chain of thought or post tokens. So what you're saying right now is a range of strategy, sampling strategies, quadrants, depending on how the model is behaving, with your core idea that the selection for work can be shifted depending on what the model is generating. So it's not just generation for the current world, which is going to be the entropy in general. It's also going to be generation for the past worlds, which is going to be the variantropy of the variance of entropy. So basically how certain you were of the words generated before this one, typically, on how certain you are to generate the current words. This is going to be the information is going to leverage. And it's also going to play a bit with, again, it's about a concept of, okay, we can actually leverage supplementary step of thought, supplementary step of cause, and so on, into generation time, which is kind of new again. And I think it's opened up a lot of range of what the samplers can do, which is not limited just to greedy search and all this thing that's been existing now for a while, but really about, okay, designing this token selection strategy in a kind of rather deep way. So there's a lot of visualization now available, especially made by another contributor to Entropix called Sinatras. This one I think was most with small LLMs, so it's being built up from a notebook I initially written to adapt small LLM to Entropix because it was not done, then it built up a lot of really impressive visualization of how it's being done. Okay, so these variations are kind of, well, the missing a bit like containing a lot of information, but they're really important actually. And they are not only important because, okay, they help you to get better into what is happening with the samplers, but they are actually being used right now to tune the samplers typically, because you can use a lot of parameters to decide, okay, are you going to adapt to the model and so on. And depending to the variation you're going to see right now, you can get some kind of different decisions about how you're going to basically fit the Entropix approach and the various sampling strategies. So yeah, again, one of the core idea is that you're going to have these different branches of narratives you can use. I think I have an example before. No, I don't have it. So typically, there's a story being made with small LM, and what you get right now is kind of potential break into generation thing. And so you see basically the text right now. This is basically breaks where you're going to get more entropy or more entropy because basically the model is kind of unsure what's going to be doing. It is going to use different kind of strategy for it. So again, something which are really important is that these reasoning steps, they can use a pose token. So this post token, it can be a lot of things right now. If I understand it well right now, what's being done, we can typically repurpose an untrained tokens. So it may seem like a weird thing actually, because normally untrained tokens are kind of a bug in the model. Basically, it should not even exist if the tokenizer was correctly trained. Right now, they mostly exist typically in Llama because it is a special tokens that not being allocated. But actually, they can have a virtue because they're kind of a blank in the model strategy because you can attach no meaning to that. So you don't know exactly what to do. And it kind of enforce this kind of reasoning thing. So again, this is the question, which number is a larger, 99911 is give the correct answer and the correct rationale despite being very small models. And how does it do it? Well, different kind of strategies and you see it mentioned right now. The first one is typically exploring forks. So exploring potential alternatives into generations. And then we got trading carefully, typically, okay, being kind of very, 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 very careful about the kind of tokens it's going to select, basically, throughout the entire process. So you see, basically, once again, it's really, really, really about this kind of combination where, okay, at some point you need to be creative, you need to force the model to, okay, I'm going to explore all these paths. I'm going to see all of these things. Actually, you can not only explore the past tokens, but they are also being approached like middle out, where we can also explore the future tokens. We can pre-generate them. It's also being approached being also speculative decoding for this. You can even use a small model for that. It can also inform, basically, a model can see into the future all the possible futures that can exist and take a selection depending on that. So you have this part, and then you have this part where basically the model should be reasonably safe about what it's stating, but we can still be trading a bit carefully about that. So the main issue right now is really evaluation. So I mentioned already that MinP has been formally evaluated. There are also evaluation being run within the Entropix project, which is kind of already showing that, okay, it's working rather well. It's difficult because right now, again, sampler research is both not that developed, and there have been not that many things area and really being relaunched really very, very recently. So we're kind of lacking the proper baseline for this. There are very few data points in the literature. And even actually the ones that exist actually are not that well evaluated typically, and the people were not necessarily having in mind complex math problems. They were more having in mind things like a very standard evaluation process, like ELASTWAG and stuff like this. So since that is the thing we're interested in right now. So, and then the other key issue, and I think also the issue when I've been seeing also implementation, evaluation of entropy being made by people not really involved in the project. They are not really assessing correctly, actually, how complex it can be to run these things typically. And if you don't really take care about, okay, how you're going to implement, how you're going to adapt the parameters to the model you're going to run, and also to your overall inference engine and stuff like this, where you can basically have some kind of semantic words that's not going to be really due to Entropix or anything, but more about how you're going to apply it. So this is the part where it kind of gets a bit more harder, basically, to really get good evaluation. But everything seems to be reasonably promising. And again, I think it's really more about the core concept. It's not so much about the general idea of the benchmark. It's really more about, okay, we have come into a step right now in the history of LLMs where we're not just interested in very short answers, we're not interested in memorization, we're interested in reasoning, we're interested in long outputs. So we need to think about how we can better design these outputs, we can better design this narrative construct to get something which is going to be actually useful and verifiable and all of these things. So I was going to end this presentation right now, but I'm just going to be asking the question because actually it's also an open question with the Entropix project, and now they are definitely very active direction in this area, which is about training. Typically, we have seen that when we sample the tokens, we are using the distribution of logits typically, and okay, we have the choice typically to all the tokens are in play at some point when we're going to generation. It's the same thing for training. Because all these tests basically what the model is going to see the new tokens, it's going to generate the new tokens on some side in a kind of very internal ways, and it's going to compare what it's been seeing with what was the actual tokens being used for trading. It's going to grade all of these things. It's going to be the measure of loss, which is the most important one we use to assess whether the model is training or not. So this process, once again, has been done once. At some point, a lot of people are simply reusing all these building blocks, and we can actually wonder right now if it does really select the right tokens. If it's really a good idea that what we're doing right now to just present the token as they are, or we should not basically have more complex measurements and we integrate more statistics and just the loss function, which is a simplification once again. Well, for obvious reasons of engineering, I didn't want to overly complexify the thing, but still, the question is worth asking. Are we really generating the best token? Are we really training on the best tokens right now? Should we not have a consider kind of ponderation strategies into place? Maybe it can help to get faster training or more reasoning adverse aware training? It's a kind of an open question right now, and still it's open up some very interesting directions about where we're going to go. So I'm going to leave you with all of these thoughts, and once again, I'm going to introduce the post tokens at this point to let you think about it. I think once again, what all this sampling research is showing you to us actually that we are right now in a very, very interesting moment in LLM research, because what we're seeing at this point, while there is a discussion right now about the scaling wall, about okay, maybe just taking more GPUs is not enough. Well, which may not be entirely true, but still, I think there's still this idea that right now, maybe we need to rethink a bit how we have been doing, because a lot of things we have been doing for the last 2, 3, 4 years has been okay. We had this great design about LLMs, about transformers, about attentions, and we added rope and all those things. Okay, we got the kind of standard paradigms now right now for models. There have been alternative being tried, there have been members, there have been all these things, but still it seems to be roughly the best approach. But what are not being tried is to actually break it down a bit more and seeing, okay, are we really optimizing all of these things? So probably the core attention part is really very well optimized, and even what we have been seeing with members is not that revolutionary actually so far. Still, the other parts, the other components I've been mentioning a lot throughout the presentation, the tokenization, the token embeddings, softmax functions, all of these things, we're not really sure we really nailed it in the first run. And the fact we haven't really had nailed it right now is actually kind of a good news, because it means that there's a lot of things being open right now for research. And even for research, we don't really need a lot of GPU for, we just need to be a little more clever.